Jacob Rivers and Emily Hart had never believed in the supernatural. When they took jobs at the Old Town Post Office, they thought it would be just another quiet night shift. But the building had a secret, one that watched, waited, and remembered. The letters weren't just messages, they were warnings. Shadows moved where no light reached, and every envelope told a story that wasn't meant to be read. By the time Jacob and Emily realized they were trapped, the post office had already begun collecting their fears, and it would never let them go. I arrived at the post office just as the sun disappeared behind the jagged rooftops of the town. The building was old, brick red and weathered, with paint peeling from the heavy wooden doors. Its windows were clouded with grime, giving the place a permanent shadow even in daylight. I had taken the night shift because I needed the money, but as I stepped inside, I immediately regretted it. The air smelled faintly of ink, paper, and something metallic like rust. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering so often that the shadows they cast seemed alive, crawling along the walls and floors in strange, jagged shapes. I set down my bag and began sorting the first batch of letters. At first, it was easy to focus. The envelopes were mostly routine: bills, advertisements, a few birthday cards. But the silence of the post office pressed against my ears, thick and oppressive. Every small noise, the shuffle of paper, the hum of the heater, felt magnified, like the building itself was listening. When I bent over a stack of packages, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my eye. I straightened up and scanned the room, but there was nothing, just empty rows of mailboxes and the dim light bouncing off the counter. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me, a sticky weight I couldn't escape. As the clock ticked past 10, I heard a soft scraping sound from the back room. My heart jumped, and I froze. The sound stopped when I moved closer, replaced by a faint whisper, almost like paper brushing against paper, but irregular, uneven, urgent. My hand hovered over the door handle, trembling. But when I opened it, the room was empty. Boxes of mail were stacked neatly, as if waiting for someone, but there was no one there. I closed the door and leaned against it, chest heaving, telling myself it was just nerves. Hours passed slowly, each minute stretching like an eternity. The shadows seemed to grow darker, reaching across the walls like long fingers. My eyes kept catching envelopes that weren't there a moment before, lying on the counter in haphazard piles. I picked one up. The handwriting was jagged, slanted, frantic. No return address, no stamp, no indication it belonged to anyone. My fingers tingled as I held it, a cold sense of dread creeping up my spine. And then I heard it. A muffled scream, low and distant, echoing through the brick halls. My stomach turned as I spun around, but the sound vanished almost as soon as it appeared, leaving only the oppressive quiet behind. My hands shook as I set the envelope down, glancing around the dimly lit room. The shadows seemed to lean closer, almost pressing against me, and I realized I wasn't alone. Something was there, just beyond the edge of sight, patient and silent, watching. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep sorting, to act as if nothing was wrong, but every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. My eyes kept darting toward the corner of the room, expecting the figure to appear, but nothing did. And then, from the darkness behind the sorting table, I saw it. A faint movement, a ripple of shadow, and for a second, I thought it had a face. I blinked, and it was gone, leaving me alone in the silence once more. My heart pounded in my ears, and the envelope still lay there, untouched, waiting, as if it had been sent specifically for me. The post office, I realized with a shiver, was alive in a way I couldn't understand, and it had noticed me. The next night, I returned to the post office, trying to convince myself the previous night had been a trick of fatigue and nerves. The street outside was empty, silent except for the distant hum of a street lamp. When I pushed open the heavy door, the air inside was colder than I remembered, sharp and metallic, biting at my skin. The flickering fluorescent lights cast the same long, uneasy shadows, but now they seemed thicker, darker, almost moving when I wasn't looking directly at them. I felt my chest tighten, a sense of being watched curling around me like smoke. I forced myself to begin sorting the letters, trying to focus on the routine task. The envelopes felt heavier this time, almost as if they carried the weight of unseen hands pressing against them. My eyes kept flicking to the corners of the room, expecting to see something, anything, that would explain the unease twisting inside me. And then I saw the first envelope that wasn't supposed to be there. It lay on the counter in jagged, frantic handwriting, the same handwriting as the one from last night. My name was scrawled across it, though I had never received anything like this before. My fingers shook as I picked it up, and an icy shiver ran down my spine. I tried to ignore it, putting it aside and continuing my work, but more envelopes began appearing, each one addressed to me. Some were stacked neatly, as if someone had carefully placed them, while others were tossed haphazardly, their paper rustling softly in the unnatural silence. Everyone bore a single warning, a phrase written with sharp, hurried strokes. "You shouldn't be here." I swallowed hard, a hollow knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't just letters now. They were messages, threats, whispers materialized into paper. I tried to ignore it, putting it aside and continuing my work, but more envelopes began appearing, each one addressed to me. Some were stacked neatly, as if someone had carefully placed them, while others were tossed haphazardly, their paper rustling softly in the unnatural silence. Everyone bore a single warning, a phrase written with sharp, hurried strokes. "You shouldn't be here." I swallowed hard, a hollow knot forming in my stomach. It wasn't just letters now, they were messages, threats, whispers materialized into paper. I moved through the rows of mailboxes, each step echoing too loudly, and the shadows seemed to ripple along the walls, stretching unnaturally toward me. A cold draft brushed my ankle and I jumped, looking down to find nothing. The packages and letters around me remained untouched, but the sense of being followed intensified, prickling at the back of my neck. I dared not turn too quickly, afraid whatever was watching would see me. Then I saw it, a shadow slipping along the wall. It didn't match the flickering light. It moved with a subtle, almost serpentine grace, stretching and condensing like it had no real form. For a brief moment I could swear it had a face, but every time I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the oppressive silence and the feeling of eyes boring into my skin. My heart raced and my hands trembled as I picked up another envelope. The writing inside made my blood run cold. It described things I had never told anyone, private fears and regrets that I had never written down. Yet somehow the letter knew. The room grew colder, shadows lengthened, and the fluorescent lights flickered violently, bathing the room in sudden, stuttering darkness. I felt it then, a presence, patient and waiting, circling around me, watching my every move. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I realized, with a shiver, that the post office itself was alive, and it didn't like intruders. By the time I left, dawn was breaking. I stumbled out into the pale morning light, shaking, my skin cold and clammy. The letters had followed me to the counter, a small silent reminder that I wasn't safe. And even as I walked away, I could feel it, just beyond the edge of sight, still watching, waiting for the next night. By the third night, exhaustion had settled into my bones. Sleep had become a stranger, leaving me tense and irritable, haunted by images of flickering lights and shadowed corners. The post office no longer felt like a building. It felt like a living thing, patient and alert, aware of every breath I took. As I stepped through the doors, the metallic chill wrapped around me, sharper than before, and the fluorescent lights buzzed with a strange intensity, casting trembling shadows across the rows of mailboxes. I tried to focus on sorting, stacking letters and packages mechanically, but my hands shook so badly that envelopes slipped through my fingers, That S when I noticed it, a door at the back of the post office I had never seen. Its paint was cracked and faded, the wood darkened with age, and yet it seemed to call to me, whispering in a language I didn't understand. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to leave it alone, but my feet moved before my mind could catch up. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit corridor lined with mailboxes. Some were rusted, some open, some stuffed with letters yellowed with age. The air smelled stale and metallic, and I felt a subtle vibration beneath my feet, like the building itself was breathing. A faint scratching sound echoed from the far end, irregular and persistent, like fingernails on wood. I froze, every nerve in my body alert, but curiosity, or perhaps dread, drove me forward. The corridor twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Walls narrowed and widened, shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the floor creaked underfoot as if responding to my presence. At the very end, a single mailbox hung low, its metal surface tarnished. My name was etched crudely across it. My heart lurched. I had never seen this mailbox before, and yet it demanded my attention. Inside, I found letters, dozens of them. Each bore my handwriting, but the words were wrong, twisted, dark. They described fears I hadn't even spoken aloud, memories I tried to bury, thoughts I had never allowed myself to think. A cold wind rushed through the corridor, slamming the door behind me with a force that knocked me to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and tried to open the door. It wouldn't budge. The scratching grew louder, circling me now, coming from everywhere at once. Shadows stretched from the corners, crawling along the walls, and I could feel something moving just beyond my vision, patient, watching, waiting. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and I felt panic clawing at my chest. I stumbled over a pile of old letters, scattering them across the floor, and a strange sensation of eyes on my back made me spin around. The corridor was empty, but the shadows shifted as if mocking me. My own reflection appeared in a tarnished metal panel, distorted, pale, eyes wide with terror. But for a fraction of a second, the face moved independently, smiling in a way I never had. I pounded on the door, screaming silently, but the sound seemed swallowed by the thick, suffocating air. The letters in the mailbox rustled, flipping open as if an unseen hand was reading them, memorizing my fears, and I realized with a cold certainty that the post office had a memory, and it knew me now fully in a way that would never let me go. By the fourth night, I was trembling even before I stepped into the post office. The streets outside were silent, the kind of silence that pressed against your ears and made your own heartbeat deafening. I knew I shouldn't have returned, but some part of me couldn't stay away. The building loomed ahead like a living thing, its brick walls dark and menacing under the faint glow of the streetlights. The moment I crossed the threshold, a chill wrapped around me like a fist, sharp and unrelenting. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, casting the long, jagged shadows I had come to dread. Each row of mailboxes seemed to lean toward me, and the envelopes rustled softly, as if whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. My hands shook as I began sorting the letters, but every movement felt heavy, sluggish, as though the building itself was resisting me. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the routine tasks, but a cold dread gnawed at my stomach. Something was in the post office with me, moving just beyond my vision, patient, silent, and watching. I noticed the stacks of letters with jagged handwriting again. They weren't just on the counters this time. They appeared on the floor, on chairs, even hanging from the edges of shelves. Each envelope seemed to pulse slightly, a heartbeat of paper, and my name was scrawled across them over and over. When I picked one up, the words inside chilled me to the bone. They described failures I hadn't admitted to myself, fears I had buried, memories I had never shared. It was as if the post office had found a way to reach inside my mind. I walked through the sorting room, and the shadows moved with me. They twisted unnaturally, curling along the walls, reaching across the floor, following my every step. A cold breeze brushed past my neck, though no windows were open. My breath came in ragged gasps as I realized that the doors I had used to enter the building were gone, replaced by a solid wall of brick. Panic surged, but there was nowhere to run. I tried to call for help, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence, leaving only the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. Then I saw them, figures emerging slowly from between the rows of mail, thin and pale, their faces blank and unreadable. They didn't walk. They glided, jerking unnaturally, their movements inhuman. They reached out toward me, and the cold seeped into my bones. I tried to back away, but the shadows seemed to push me forward, forcing me deeper into the building. The letters began to flutter and swirl around me, lifting like a storm, each one whispering my name, each one recounting my fears with a cruel familiarity. I stumbled and fell to the floor, the envelopes piling over me. The figures closed in, faceless and patient. I could feel their presence pressing into my chest, suffocating, relentless. And in that moment, I understood. The post office wasn't just a building. It was a trap, alive and sentient, storing the fears of anyone who dared to enter. I was not leaving, not tonight, and the shadows waited, silent, hungry, and eternal. I woke to the pale light of morning streaming through the post office windows, though my body ached as if I had spent years on the cold concrete floor. For a moment I thought it had all been a nightmare. The twisting corridors, the shadowed figures, the letters that knew my secrets. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly above me, humming a dull, steady note that felt almost comforting after the horrors of the night. I rose unsteadily, brushing dust and grime from my clothes, my eyes scanning the room. Everything appeared normal. The sorting tables were in their usual places, the mail stacked neatly, and the building smelled faintly of paper and ink, nothing more. I stumbled outside, breathing in the fresh morning air as if it could wash away the lingering dread. The streets were quiet, the town still sleeping. I told myself I would never return to the post office at night, that I would put this behind me. But when I reached into my bag for my phone, I froze. There it was, an envelope, lying neatly among my belongings. My name was written in the same jagged, frantic handwriting that had haunted me for nights. My hands trembled as I picked it up, my stomach twisting into knots of dread. Inside was a photograph, small and grainy, but horrifyingly clear. It showed me inside the post office, surrounded by shadowy figures I could not remember seeing, their forms blurred and formless, yet unmistakably present. I stared, unable to breathe, unable to tear my eyes away. The shadows were positioned around me as if waiting, patient and silent, and in the photograph, they seemed to lean in, observing my every move. A cold, prickling sensation ran along my spine. It wasn't just a photo, it was a warning. I tried to drop it, to burn it, even bury it in the ground outside the post office. But each time I looked away and then back, it returned, lying in my hands as though it had never left. And then I noticed something more unsettling. The shadows from the photograph were moving, subtly shifting their positions. My heart pounded as I realized that no photograph could capture movement like that. The post office wasn't done with me. It had found a way to follow me beyond its walls. That night I locked myself in my apartment, trying to ignore the faint scratching sounds that seemed to echo from the corners of the room, the rustle of letters sliding across my desk. Sleep refused to come, and when I dared to close my eyes, I could feel their presence, waiting just beyond the veil of consciousness. Every sound became a whisper, every shadow a threat, and the photograph never left my sight, its dark figures ever patient, ever watching. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time had begun to feel meaningless, and still the envelopes arrived. Each one brought a new photograph, showing me in places I had never been, yet always under the watchful eyes of shadowed figures. I had become part of a collection, a subject in a living memory the post office kept. And deep down, I knew there would be no escape. One night, I would walk through its doors again, drawn by a force I could never resist. The last envelope I received bore only a single word, scrawled across the page in jagged letters. Soon. And when I looked up, my apartment was empty. But I could feel the walls breathing, closing in, and I knew, with a terror that froze my blood, that the post office was already here.